Hi, this is Silent Partner. Welcome back to the channel. You're here with me, Teach. This is the Bible as Synopsis, where each week we look at one book of the Bible and I just give you some clarity on what that book's about. If you're an avid Bible reader and you've read through some of these books and you're a little bit confused about what certain things meant, this should give you some clarity. Or if you've never read the book before and you just want to know, listen, I want to know what it's about, I've never read it, I want to know what it's about, I don't want to read the whole thing, then you're in the right place. Okay, so if you've been following the channel, you know that last week we looked at the book of First Kings. So this week we're looking at the book of Second Kings. So thank you, as I said, for joining me. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. And also, I just want to say, if this content is really encouraging you, and you know that anyone else that would be encouraged by it, please pass it along to friends, to colleagues, to family members, and anyone you know that would love this. And just let's continue to build the kingdom together. Okay, now we're going to dive straight into today's lesson, but I just want to say, grab your pens and your pads, and as I'm reading through my notes, you should be taking your own notes and we should be learning together. Okay, so Second Kings, as I said, is just a continuation of First Kings. We look at prophets like Elijah, Elisha, Jeremiah, who continuously warn the people of their sin. They're warning them of the judgment that's going to come if they continue turning their back on God. And sometimes they deliver also messages of hope. Ultimately, Second Kings serves as a reminder of the importance of faithfulness to God and the consequences of neglecting God. Right, so the book of Second Kings continues the history of Israel begun in First Kings. The book continues to detail Israel's monarchy, the history of both the northern kingdoms of Israel and the southern kingdoms of Judah. It spans from the reign of King Ahaziah to the fall of both kingdoms, and it covers approximately 300 years, from the death of King Ahab to the Babylonian exile. Okay, so the book opens with the prophet Elijah's dramatic departure and the rise of his successor Elisha. Now, if you know anything about the nation of Israel at that time, there was this, as I said, this continuation of sin. They kept on sinning, turning their back on God, forgetting the covenant that they had made with God. They ended up in witchcraft, they ended up in paganism, they ended up in idolatry, lots of idolatry. And during this time there would be judgment, and the judgment would come in the form of a war, or of capture, or it might be famine, it might be exile, it might be captivity. But during this time of captivity or exile, they would cry out to God and they would say, Lord, save us, Lord, save us. And the Lord would send a deliverer. And the deliverer would normally be in the form of a judge or a prophet or a king, usually a prophet. And they would cry out even to the prophet and ask for deliverance. And God would send relief and deliverance. And then during this time of deliverance and relief, they would enter into a time of peace. And in this time of peace and tranquility, they would turn their back on God. And they would start worshipping idols. And they would get involved in paganism and witchcraft. And they would kill their children and throw them into the fire. And all kinds of wicked and evil practices. And then there would be judgment, and God would send judgment in the form of war and exile and during that time, they would cry out to God again, and during that time, God would send another deliverer. And this just continued and continued. So we kind of see, as I said, this dramatic departure of Elijah. And then we see the entry of his successor, Elisha. And Elisha's miracles and his guidance show that even during all of this time, God's involvement was ongoing with his people, and he never completely turned away from them, and he never completely turned his back on them, and he never threw them out of his sight. But his involvement was always ongoing, and his love would remain constant and steady. As the book unfolds, the divided kingdoms of Israel and Judah face internal idolatry and corruption, and many external threats as well. In Judah, the book details the lives and reforms of some good kings like Hezekiah and Josiah, who sought to return the people to worshiping the one true God. This, however, is contrasted against the reigns of many wicked kings who led the nation into spiritual decline in Israel. So in Israel, there are kings such as Jehu and Jeroboam II, and others who are emphasized for their often idolatrous practices and neglect of the covenant that they have made with God. All of this ultimately led to the Assyrians' conquest of Israel. 2 Kings highlights the reigns of various kings and their fidelity, and sometimes their infidelity to God, and the prophetic voices that arise during that time. Yeah, as I said, prophets like Elijah and Isaiah and Elisha and Jeremiah and others are prominent throughout that time, serving as reminders of God's power and often calling individuals and the nation to repentance, warning many of the consequences of disobedience. Sadly, these warnings go mostly ignored, which then culminates in a series of invasions and conquests, the last of these being the Assyrian conquest of Israel in 722 BC, and the Babylonians, who exiled Judah in 586 BC. So, the book concludes with the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem and the exile of the people of Babylon, symbolizing the fulfillment of God's judgment and emphasizing the consequences of turning away from God. So, 2 Kings looks deeply into, and 1, the cyclical nature of sin and judgment. 2, the consequences of turning away from God. And 3, the importance of paying attention to and heeding the prophetic voice when they speak. So this has been 2 Kings. I hope this has helped. Thank you.